Hey there, folks. The case we're going to talk about in this video fits a specific kind of category, which is missing people who are later found and discovered to have fallen from somewhere, but there is seemingly nowhere to fall from. It's a subset of missing person cases that you might have heard of before. Frankly, I've never encountered a case that was legitimate, but still, it's something that you hear about every now and then. It's one of those things that gets around without any specific case attached to it as evidence. You know, I sometimes get people asking, well, how do you explain the missing people who appear to have fallen from the sky? And like I said, I don't know that this supposed phenomenon really exists. How is it that some people could believe there is a subset of missing persons cases like this? Well, that's a question for another time. So, I get emails about this supposed phenomenon and also a lot about this other one in which people apparently go missing and then their clothes are found neatly folded somewhere. I've never encountered a legitimate, unexplainable version of that scenario either. And what I mean by that is, when this scenario has occurred, when somebody has disappeared and their clothes are found neatly folded, it's been next to a body of water. The easy answer would then be that they undressed, went swimming, and drowned. And there's really only one case that comes to mind where this specific wording was even used. So to be more specific, I've never come across a legitimate version of that scenario that wasn't near a body of water. And for it to be considered something strange or unusual, it really kind of needs to be in a spot that's not near water. If you know of any, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm always interested. Anyway, I'm getting off track already. We're here to talk about missing people who seem to fall out of the sky. Well, today we're going to talk about a case that has been put in that category, not by me, but by others. Anyway, I actually found the case to be quite fascinating. It's the story of a doctor in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I kind of understand where it gets its reputation for being mysterious. Most of the articles you might see online about this case say that this doctor was found in an odd location and that he died from a fall. And that's pretty much it. When you hear that someone died from a fall, you might presume that the individual fell from some significant height. But this case has left people wondering, where could this man have fallen from? You might ask how that could make any sense. It's a fair question and one we'll try to answer in this video. So let's closely examine the death of Dr. Christopher Robert. Dr. Christopher Robert was a 50-year-old man who lived in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He lived with his wife of almost 20 years, Carrie Ace, who was also a doctor working at the Children's Hospital of Minnesota. They had 2 kids, an 18-year-old son and an 11-year-old daughter. Chris had worked for the Hennepin County Medical Center for the last 11 years as an anesthesiologist. For the last 5 years, he was the chief of anesthesiology. He and his wife had a home in Faribault, Minnesota, and also a home in Minneapolis. Due to their busy schedules and long work hours, the condo in Minneapolis made their lives easier by reducing turnaround time while working in the city. Chris was well liked by his peers and considered a wonderful man and an amazing father. At approximately 6 p.m. on December 4th, 2015, Chris was hanging out at his condo in Minneapolis when his friend Konstantin arrived. Konstantin was also a doctor and anesthesiologist at the Hennepin County Medical Center. The 2 men made alcoholic drinks, a dirty martini for each of them, and then sat around for a while socializing. They had tentative plans to go out to eat at an upscale steakhouse called Ruth's Chris in Minneapolis. Unfortunately, their plans were foiled when they attempted to get a reservation and discovered the restaurant was booked out. They had tried a few other eateries, but they were unable to get a reservation. Since their plans were falling through, they decided to attend a work-related event, the Anesthesia Annual Christmas Party held at the Libertine on 3001 Hennepin Avenue South. The 2 men drove to the Libertine using Konstantin's vehicle. While at the party, Konstantin said that Chris was communicative with everyone and was the life of the party. He said that he saw Chris have 3 to 4 alcoholic drinks during the time he was there. Around 7:30 to 8 p.m., one of Chris's friends, a co-worker and nurse anesthetist named Paige, showed up to the party. She would later say that during the time she was there, she saw Chris drink a handful of dirty martinis. Paige stayed with Chris most of the night, hanging out and talking with him. At around 10 p.m. that night, Konstantin was ready to leave as he had to work at the hospital the following day. He approached Chris, gave him a hug, and asked if he wanted a ride back to his home. Chris decided that he wanted to stay at the party. Before leaving, Konstantin approached Paige and the two agreed that she would get Chris home either by Uber or taxi. At approximately 11:45 p.m., Paige and Chris went outside to smoke a cigarette, and then they went back inside the restaurant. Paige said that while Chris was standing next to the host table, his head was bobbing back and forth, and his body was swaying and staggering, and his speech was slurred. A waitress came over and asked him if he wanted some water. Paige said that Chris appeared to be pretty intoxicated at the end of the night, but that he acted fine and could walk. Around midnight, Paige said that Chris and her were inside talking. He was on her right side when she turned for a very brief moment and began talking to a couple of other people. When she turned back around, Chris was gone. She immediately attempted to call Chris's cell phone, but he did not answer. Paige then went outside to look for Chris. She walked around the area a bit but couldn't find him. Afterwards, Paige returned to the party and went on with her night, completely unaware of whatever fate befell Chris. In the early morning hours of December 5th, two men driving along Interstate 94 in Minneapolis thought they noticed the body of a man lying on the side of the road. At the time, they simply drove past. It was still before sunrise, so it was pretty dark out, and they weren't sure what they saw. Still, they felt they had seen a body, and they wanted to be sure, so they turned around to the nearest exit and readied themselves to make another pass in the area. This time, their worst fears were confirmed as they stopped on the side of the road and saw that there was indeed a man lying there, apparently deceased. They immediately called 911 to report the discovery and waited for first responders to arrive. During this time, they made no attempt to touch the body or confirm whether the individual was dead or alive. State Patrol first arrived on scene around 7:30 a.m. after being dispatched to an unresponsive male on the westbound side of Interstate 94 at Groveland Avenue. An ambulance was already there, and it was quickly determined that the male was deceased. The body was lying face down on the pavement of the emergency shoulder cutout just east of the Groveland Avenue Bridge. There appeared to be a potential injury to the back of the head. The male also had bloody hands, a dark-colored coat, dark jeans that were ripped near the lower left leg area, a dark-colored belt, and one black dress shoe on the left foot, but the right foot was missing a shoe altogether. It was noted that the belt on the pants was undone, the button on the pants was unbuttoned, and the zipper was down. An iPhone was found in the man's right front coat pocket and was locked by password. To authorities on scene, it did not appear as though the man had been struck by a vehicle despite him having been found on the roadside. The body was then covered with a sheet, and part of I-94 was shut down for the duration of the immediate investigation. Troopers decided they needed to find exactly where the man had been injured, and where he had come from, so they decided to try and find the missing black dress shoe. They went up the highway embankment and began looking around the local streets just above I-94. On Clifton Avenue, just east of the Groveland Avenue Bridge, they located the shoe on the northern side of a chain-link fence that separated the highway from Clifton Avenue. That would be the Clifton Avenue side of the fence, not the I-94 side. The top crossbar on the chain-link fence appeared to have a bloody handprint on it. It fully appeared that the man either jumped or attempted to jump the fence, but was already bleeding at the time that he did this. Officers on scene thought it appeared as though the person grabbed the fence from the I-94 side. Blood was also noticed in the grass near where the shoe was discovered. On the embankment south of the fence, they discovered some more blood in the grass and also an area that appeared to have vomit. At around 9 to 10 a.m., the Minneapolis Police Crime Lab and homicide detectives arrived to take over the investigation, as none of this looked like a simple accident. By this time, the body was still unidentified, as no identification was found on or near the deceased at the time. The crime lab collected numerous items from the area of Clifton and Groveland Avenue that were found near the roadside. Most of these items appeared to be litter that had been there for some time, but it would be hard to be certain. The report notes that these items were thought to be somewhat out of the ordinary within the scene established by first responders with the evidence tape. The items included an Arizona iced tea can, broken pieces of a prescription bottle, a cardboard coffee cup, and a plastic planter tray. Any areas of blood were swabbed for testing. The Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office came to take custody of the body, which was later identified during autopsy as Dr. Christopher Robert. This was done after the discovery of a Minnesota driver's license for Christopher Robert located in the front left pants pocket. Officers canvassed the general neighborhood looking for witnesses. They went to the Nancy Page building, which is a crisis center, directly across the street from the chain-link fence. Inside, they asked the staff if they were missing any residents or if they were aware of anything happening out on the street. The staff said no to both questions. Eventually, a female resident came forward with some information about the night prior. This potential witness told officers that she had heard someone screaming for help in the early morning hours. She said that she heard someone saying, "Help me," over and over again at approximately 3 to 4 a.m. She said that it sounded like a man's voice. She did not get up and out of bed to look out her window to see who was yelling. Later, she got up to use the restroom at around 4:30 a.m., and by this time, the screaming had stopped. Officers were unable to find any other witnesses after checking many of the other buildings in the neighborhood. 2 sergeants with the department went out looking for Chris's current address, but they had a difficult time finding it. After a few failed attempts, they finally tracked down Chris's wife, Carrie Ace, at their apartment. The 2 officers arrived at the condo and knocked on the door. They were met by a female who identified herself as Carrie Ace. Carrie immediately began to cry and asked if her husband was okay or if something had happened to him. They all sat down and the officers explained as much as they knew thus far. Carrie wanted to know how Chris died exactly, but the cause of death was still under investigation. While there, officers also checked to make sure that all of Chris's firearms were accounted for in the home, and they were. Carrie said that the day before, when she had seen Chris, he had an alcoholic drink. She explained that Chris did not use or carry his firearm if he had been drinking alcohol. Carrie said that she had last spoken to her husband in the early evening of December 4th. She told them that Chris was at their condo in Minneapolis with a friend named Constantine that day. Carrie explained that Constantine was also a doctor at the Hennepin County Medical Center. She said that both were drinking a dirty martini and planned to go to Ruth's Chris Steakhouse in Minneapolis later that night. As far as she knew, Chris did not have any additional plans for that evening. Officers would interview Constantine the next day, looking to hear his version of events on the evening of December 4th. Constantine said that he had known Chris for 15 years, and the 2 were friends. The details he told police provided the background for much of the information contained in the beginning of this video, dealing with Chris's movements on the night of the 4th. Constantine said that he was ready to leave the party around 10 p.m., but Chris was not, so he spoke to Paige about making sure that Chris got home safely, either by Uber or a taxi, because he noticed that Chris was intoxicated. Constantine left that night thinking everything would be okay. He said that he later communicated with Paige the next morning, and she told him that she was supposed to leave the party with Chris, but something happened. Around midnight, she and Chris went outside for a smoke. Paige then went back inside briefly, but when she came back out, Chris was no longer there. Paige didn't know where he went or what had happened. Constantine was briefly asked about whether Chris was carrying a firearm or if he was aware of any threats to Chris recently. Constantine answered no to both questions. He said that Chris liked to walk and could recall multiple instances where Chris would walk instead of drive. Still, Constantine thought it could be unusual for Chris to attempt to walk home to his condo in this situation because of the distance, approximately 3 miles. Constantine suspected that since Chris had been drinking, he might have made the attempt. Detectives interviewed Paige on December 8th. She said that she had known Chris since 2008 when she began working at the Hennepin County Medical Center. She said that although she considered Chris a great friend, they never discussed private or personal matters. She told detectives her recollection of seeing Chris at the party up until the point he apparently left without telling anyone. She said that Chris had his credit cards with him while he was at the party. Paige didn't know anything about what could have happened to Chris after he left, but she did recall him appearing to be quite intoxicated at the end of the night. At least one detective returned to the Groveland Avenue Bridge periodically in the weeks that followed. The hope was that they might spot a homeless individual living underneath it who may have witnessed what happened to Chris on the night of the 4th. Unfortunately, they never encountered anyone at the location. On this same day, detectives received surveillance footage from the Libertine restaurant where the Christmas party was held. They note that the video cameras had a tendency to skip seconds or even a minute at a time. Still, they saw Chris on the cameras with Paige. Together they walk out of the restaurant at 11:19 p.m. They see him walk back in at 11:25, then out again, then back in. At 11:51 p.m., Chris walks alone towards the front door and leaves. The footage confirmed much of what witnesses had said prior to Chris leaving the Christmas party. On January 5th of 2016, detectives were able to speak with a witness named Samantha who had called 911 on the night that Chris Robert disappeared. The witness had been traveling in the westbound lane of I-94 during the early morning hours of December 5th when they noticed a tall white male going over the median in the middle of the highway. They were wearing a wool jacket and dark pants. She said that the man was on one leg in the process of climbing over the median and toward the eastbound lanes of traffic. Samantha said she could not tell that the man was injured, nor did she see any cars near him as if he had recently got out of a vehicle that had broken down. This was why she thought it was strange that there was a man on the interstate. She then called 911 to report the incident. The time was 12:56 a.m. On January 6th, Carrie Ace came to the police headquarters to meet with detectives. She explained that she had spoken with Apple about obtaining the information inside of Chris's iPhone. An Apple employee had told her that if she got law enforcement on the phone with her while in the presence of Apple personnel, they would allow her to access the phone. When this actually was attempted in practice, Apple denied access to Chris's wife anyway. To that point, no information had been retrieved from the iPhone due to the fact that the password protection was there, and multiple attempts had been made by police specialists to crack it. None of them could. On January 14th, detectives received an email from Carrie Ace asking about Chris's wedding band and whether or not she could have it back. Detectives informed her that the wedding band was not on Chris when he was found, at least according to the medical examiner's office. Carrie then wanted to know if there was any possible ways they could locate the wedding band. Detectives put the description of the ring into the automated pawn system, which is used to flag potentially stolen items that are submitted to pawn shops. They also checked the system but could not locate a match for the ring. They told Carrie they would continue checking the automated pawn system going forward. Detectives were eventually able to review an interesting piece of evidence: the camera footage from I-94 on the night that Chris Robert died. To that point, detectives had been going all over the place trying to find cameras that captured Chris that night, but they found none that showed Chris during the most important moments of that night. The cameras aimed at I-94 finally showed something of potential value. The video shows a man walking on the Hennepin on-ramp to eastbound I-94. The man walks to the end of the ramp and stands there for a little while. The man then crosses the interstate from south to north. When he reaches the median on the south side, he then climbs over the median. He then climbs back over the median, before climbing over the median one more time and ending up on the north side. The man then crosses the westbound lanes heading north before heading east on this side of the roadway. He eventually goes out of view of the camera. Detectives note that the individual appears to have on the same clothing as Chris Robert, but it's really impossible to tell due to the video quality. The video timestamp does match up with the time that witness Samantha said she called 911 to report the man crossing the median. That witness described the individual wearing the same clothes as Chris Robert. It is almost certain that the individual seen on this video was Chris. The medical examiner would later rule that the death of Dr. Christopher Robert was accidental, due to blunt force trauma to the back of the head. Though specific blood alcohol results were not mentioned, it was reported that Chris had acute alcohol intoxication at the time of death. They also mentioned that his belt was undone and partially removed, the pants were unbuttoned and unzipped, and some small superficial injuries were observed to the area of the lower back. Lacerations were observed on the palm sides of both hands, including an incision on the left ring finger. There was an abrasion to the lower lip, abrasions on the front of both knees, abrasions on the front of the right toes, abrasions to the rear of the left leg and near the left hip, and 2 impact wounds on or near the back of the head. In the end, the case would be closed, pending any further leads. So, I would imagine after going over that timeline, you might be left feeling that there's something a little off about this case. I think I would tend to agree with that assessment. Let's go over some of the important facts that we know and summarize the timeline for the night of December 4th, 2015. We know that Chris was last seen by witnesses at the Christmas party, which was being held at the Libertine. He appeared to be intoxicated, and throughout the course of the night he had something like 4 to 5 alcoholic drinks. This largely seems to be based on the statements of 2 witnesses at the party, Paige and Constantin. So, Chris would have had to consume these drinks between 6 p.m. when he met up with his doctor friend Constantin, and about midnight when he walked out of the Libertine. For a man Chris's size, which is 5'10" and a heavy build, 4 to 5 drinks across a time span of 6 hours should not have left him highly intoxicated. Still, this estimate is far from precise, and it could be that he drank more without anyone knowing it. In fact, it would seem that this must be the case if the medical examiner said that he had acute alcohol intoxication at the time of his death. Acute alcohol intoxication typically occurs when you have a large amount of alcohol in a short amount of time, and the only way Chris could have accomplished this is if he had all or most of his drinks at the very end of the night, or if he had many drinks that people didn't witness, or if he left the Libertine and purchased more alcohol as he was going home. The last 2 are probably the most likely, but ultimately we'll never know. The only thing we do know for certain is that Chris is seen on security footage leaving the Libertine at 11:51 p.m. After that, we don't know the full details of what he did or what route he took. All we know is that someone who is almost assuredly Chris shows up on some CCTV footage walking down the Hennepin Avenue on-ramp going to I-94. According to the timestamp on the footage, the time is about 12:52 a.m. when we see him come into frame. So it took an entire hour for Chris to walk from the Libertine to I-94. That distance is about 1.5 miles, and Google estimates it would take about 30 minutes to walk. This distance and time could be different depending on what route Chris took. We also know that it would probably take Chris longer to walk just about any distance because he was intoxicated. But there is still enough time in there where something else could have happened, whether that could have been Chris purchasing more alcohol or something else entirely. Obviously, by the time we see Chris on camera, he is behaving very strangely by walking down the on-ramp, crossing the freeway, then crossing the median multiple times before crossing the other side of the freeway. When Paige last saw Chris, she said that he was acting fine and he could walk, but that he was leaning against a table, his head was bobbing, and his eyes were partially closed. She said he was obviously intoxicated. But was he intoxicated enough to attempt something like this? I asked the question because I wonder if the head trauma had already occurred by this point. In fact, I would bet that it probably had. It would explain some of this odd and confused behavior. Up until this point, he was coherent enough that he was, in fact, heading in the exact direction of his condo. I tend to think that the head trauma might have already occurred because the last time we see Chris on camera is when he reaches the north side of the freeway. That's the side of the freeway with the embankment and the chain link fence. It is all speculation from here on out, but it seems to me that Chris crossed the freeway, climbed the embankment, and then attempted to climb over the fence. When you try to climb over a fence like that, people typically throw their right foot over first once they get to the top. If he was intoxicated and injured, this might have been incredibly difficult. I could see how he might lose his right shoe while attempting this, and it would have landed on the north side of the fence where the police would eventually find it. We know his bloody palm prints were found on the crossbar of that fence, so it seems like he was already injured by the time he tried to climb it. So he might have made the attempt, but fell back down on the freeway side of the fence. The next bit of evidence we have is from the Nancy Page building directly across the street. One of the residents reported hearing someone screaming for help around 3 to 4 a.m. If true, then we have a time gap of a few hours there. But the witness doesn't seem to be too sure about the time anyway. It could be that Chris just laid down for a while. We know that vomit was found on the embankment side of the fence as well. Whatever happened, it appears that Chris's condition was probably deteriorating. Calling for help didn't work. He perhaps could no longer walk at this point and simply crawled back down the embankment and then along the shoulder of the freeway for some distance. Eventually, he would lie face down on the pavement in this location. When he's found, they decide he died from a fall, except we don't know where the fall occurred, and that's basically where we're at. Okay, so the question becomes, where did Dr. Christopher Robert sustain his injuries, and how did it happen? Obviously, I can't answer those questions, and neither can anyone else. If we could, there wouldn't be much of a mystery here. A key point to consider is this. His injury could have been sustained somewhere else, and he continued to walk in a dazed state. There might be some additional clues we can derive from the state of the body. His belt was undone, his button was unbuttoned, and his zipper was down. There are a few reasons I can think of that his clothing might be found in this configuration. One that I initially considered was that perhaps he stopped somewhere to relieve himself, and one thing males sometimes do when they're taking a leak is lean back a bit. If you're off balance, you could probably end up falling back and hitting the back of your head. Fully undoing your pants like that to relieve yourself is possible, but not really typical. We also have to consider that there were 2 impact wounds described to the back of his head. Obviously, I'm no medical examiner, and I wasn't there, so I can't comment on this with any authority, but the fact that there's 2, it makes it a harder sell as a result of a fall. A much worse scenario would be that someone could have come up behind him with the intent of robbing him and struck him in the back of the head with an object. Really, there's a few pieces of evidence combined that puts a thought or a theory into my head. The problem is I don't really want to say what it is. This man was someone's husband, someone's father, friend, son, and so on. I don't know what happened on that night. Sometimes it feels wrong to speculate with too much detail. Suffice to say, these are the items that together give me some pause. The pants in the configuration that they were found, the 2 strikes to the back of the head, the incision to the left-hand ring finger combined with the fact that the wedding ring is missing. Additionally, I could not find anything in the reports that confirmed that the credit cards Chris was carrying were found on him. But if they were, it was never mentioned. If the credit cards were missing, then that is an additional oddity. Either way, the set of known facts kind of leads me to the start of a theory that ends with this incident being a crime. Could it be something else entirely? Of course it could. In the end, I don't really see this case as being one of those where a missing person mysteriously falls from the sky. I mean, we basically see this man walk to the location he died at. The only thing in that area that you could really fall from would be the Groveland Avenue Bridge, and no CCTV captured him walking on it. The only other option would be that he climbed the poles holding the freeway signs and fell, but that seems really unlikely. I think his injuries probably occurred somewhere else, and when we see him on CCTV footage, he is already injured. If not, he would have to be injured somewhere between the freeway and the chain-link fence. Still, we are left with a bit of a disturbing mystery. Did this doctor die because of a horrible accident, or was it something more nefarious? Let me know your thoughts or theories below, and until next time, thanks for watching.